A little while ago, Pastor Ricky sent around an email asking for some volunteers who might be willing to give the sermon on a couple of the days when he couldn't be here with us. And so this email comes into my inbox, and I read it, and I laughed at myself, and I said, of course not. There's no way. I am not remotely qualified to do that. I'm not even going to consider anything remotely like that. So of course I deleted it. I didn't think anything else about it. But I really believe that God talks to me, and most of the time I don't listen, but sometimes he talks really loudly, and so then I hear. And a few things happened a little while after that email came in that eventually made me remember the email and made me come to think that God really wants me to stand up here and talk about something. So the first thing that happened was on Facebook. Dennis Hainan, who many of you know, posted something on his page that said, "Don't judge me because I sin differently than you." And that was something that I had never heard before, and it really resonated with me, and it stuck in the back of my head, and I remembered it several different times over the next couple of days at various times, and every time I would think about it, it just kind of made me pause, and I would say, that's so interesting, and it's something that I need to remember. And the second thing that happened was I was walking my dog at the same time that my neighbor was walking her dog. And Dave and I have a dog who's very high-strung and temperamental. He's very hard to own sometimes. So we invested in a trainer who really helped us a lot. And one of the things that this trainer taught us was the quote-unquote proper way to walk our dog. And we're at the point now with the dog where it's very easy to walk him. He doesn't pull on the leash. He, has a nice time walking, and it's actually a good, relaxing, easy time to be with the dog. And unless there are certain kinds of distractions, everything is great. And when there are those certain kinds of distractions, he reverts back to his older behavior, but most of the time he's really good. So anyway, I'm walking my dog, and I see my neighbor walking hers, and the first thing I thought to myself was, look at her, she's doing it all wrong, the poor thing, because of course she wasn't walking her dog the proper way. And then the second thing I thought was, why does she have to walk in front of my house anyway? Because her dog happens to be one of those distractions that turns my dog back into Mr. Hyde. And every time they see each other, it's a frantic leash-tugging mess. And then the third thing that happened was I realized how judgmental I was being. I was judging everything the poor girl did, and there was no reason for it, because who cares how she walks her dog? She walks her dog in a way that works for her, and I walk my dog in a way that works for me, and who cares if her method and mine are different? It doesn't mean that the one is better than the other, because there's no one-size-fits-all approach to walking a dog. And at that point, I remembered Pastor Ricky's email, and I remembered Dennis's Facebook post again, and I had another aha moment where I really felt this is a time where God is talking to me. He's giving me these memories. He's making me experience these things because he wants me to stand here and share this with you and talk about judgment. And the topic of judgment is a really big topic that I think can be approached from many different perspectives, because there's certainly a time and a place for passing judgment as long as it's done with discernment and from a place of love and from a perspective of helping. But what I want to talk about is the kind of judgment that I was engaged in, which is the kind that's not helpful and that doesn't serve a purpose and that can even be hurtful. And I think it seems to me that it's pretty much human nature to pass judgment. I think it's something that we've always done, and I think it's something that we always will do, and I think we just kind of have to struggle against it and try to minimize it. And one of the things that I found as I was researching this topic was one person's perspective who thought that this goes back to ancient times, because what they said was in ancient times people had to pass judgment on each other's actions because they had to decide whether or not to mimic those actions based on whether or not it would help them survive. And that made me think of the new kids movie The Croods for some reason. And I was thinking that, it's this scene in the preview where the boy comes up with shoes and he gives shoes to the girl and she looks at them and she says, "Oh, I love them." And I was thinking that if that actually happened in ancient times, the judgment could have been, hey, they look like they're going to protect my feet. And if they protect my feet, I can walk farther. And if I can walk farther, I can gather more crops and I can hunt more food. So I'm going to survive. So I really need to get myself some shoes. That's a great idea. And I think today the judgment about shoes has become, look at those shoes and that dress. What was she thinking? They don't go together. And I can see how the first judgment helps somebody and it served a purpose. And I don't see any reason why the second judgment is necessary or how it's helpful in any way. In fact, it's hurtful. So the two scripture readings that we have today are both about judging others. And they're specifically about judging others for the same behavior that you yourself engage in. And the first one was about the plank in your eye versus the speck of sawdust. And basically that's an analogy where you're judging somebody for doing something little when you yourself are doing the same thing to a much greater degree. And the second scripture reading was about Nathan telling David a story about a rich man taking a poor man's sheep when David, in fact, took another man's wife. So taking a poor man's sheep versus taking another man's wife, again, smaller degree, or greater degree. And the second scripture reading is also serving another purpose where it shows an example of a way in which you can tell an analogy like that to somebody to help them see that they are, in fact, doing the same thing somebody else is doing. Because Nathan said to David, look, you're doing the same thing. Don't you understand? Don't you realize? And speaking of David, the story of David is a really great, cool story. It's very interesting to me. And I recently watched a mini-series on TV called The Bible. And I have been lucky enough to be able to get through reading the Bible from cover to cover. And I know that reading the Bible is something that a lot of people want to do, but it's something that they struggle with, that they're challenged by. And even though I had read the Bible, I watched this story, this mini-series on TV, and it basically is a chronological telling of the story of the Bible. And it does it from a historical context as well. And it just helped me really see the Bible and understand the Bible in a new and different way that I don't think I ever would have realized or understood had I not seen this on TV. And, you know, I had, like I said, read the Bible, and I had even done Gary Atkinson's Disciple Bible Study many years ago. And despite having this background of having read the Bible, I of course knew the story of David and Goliath, and I knew the story of David and Bathsheba, which is what our second scripture reading was about. And I knew the story of God telling David that he would not be the one to build the temple in Jerusalem. But for whatever reason, I never realized those three Davids are the same person. And when I watched this miniseries on TV, that's when it all came together for me, and I came to understand the whole chronological story of David, and it was just a really cool story, and I'd love to share it, but we don't have time. But I just wanted to briefly say that if this mini-series called The Bible comes around on TV again and you notice it, try and make time to watch it, because I highly recommend it. I think you'll learn something about the Bible, and you'll just see things in a different way that you might not otherwise have gotten to know. So anyway, back to my topic. I thought about it and I researched it, and I came up with what I think are two reasons, or two kinds of judgments that most of the time don't serve any purpose. And one is the kind that we talked about with the scripture readings, where you judge others for the same behavior that you yourself do. And the other one is kind of the opposite of that, where you judge others for behavior that you would never do, or behavior that you would not tolerate in yourself. So in the first one, I think that a lot of times this happens because you don't like the behavior in yourself, and it's just easier to pass judgment on somebody else than it is to pass judgment on yourself. And I think that if we can catch ourselves at this, if we can catch ourselves judging, and then we can stop and take an honest look at ourselves and see whether or not we are judging for something that we in fact do ourselves, if we can be honest about that and accept the fact that we do, I think that'll help you become more compassionate and loving toward yourself and toward others. And I think in that way, you can turn this around from something negative into something positive. It becomes a self-improvement, because you've just become more compassionate, more loving, and more Christian. And the second judgment, when you judge somebody for behavior that you would never do, is the one that reminds me of Dennis's Facebook posting, where he said, "Don't judge me because I sin differently than you." And that also reminds me of the one that says, "Don't judge someone until you walk a mile in their shoes." Both of those are kind of talking about the fact that they're doing something that might be wrong, but they're not any better or worse than you, because you're a sinner too. So neither one of these two kinds of judgments really serves a purpose. They're both kind of hurtful many times. And if you go back to the example of the girl with the dress and the shoes, if I said that out loud and she heard me, she would be hurt by that, and she would be offended. And even if I don't say it out loud, even if I don't express it, just the fact that I had the thought internally, it's a negative thought that causes negative emotions in me, and it doesn't help anything. So I think the best thing that we can do is just to try to minimize this. And one of the ways I think we can do that is to just become self-aware and try and catch ourselves at it. And it can help maybe to think of these judgments as Satan's thoughts and just reject them. And another thing that can help is just to remember that God's grace and His salvation are things that none of us deserve, and yet any of us can achieve. And so what's the point of judging each other? Because of course that person's not worthy, but then again, neither are you. So if you instead spend your time practicing Christian love and self-improvement, you'll find, I think, that the judgments will just kind of fall away. And there's another scripture reading I want to share from James 4, verse 11 and 12 that says this: "Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you're not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? Perhaps the best thing you can do is to just communicate with people. We tend to judge ourselves by our intentions. I didn't mean to hurt him when I jokingly punched him on the shoulder, but then we judge others by their actions. Can you believe she punched him on the shoulder? Who does that? So, the only way you're going to learn somebody's intentions is to get to know them. Did you ever meet somebody that you didn't like at first, and then you got to know them, and you became friends, and you were a little surprised by that? If you talk to people, and you spend time with people, and you're friendly with people, you're going to come to learn their character and their intentions, and that's going to prevent you making these kinds of inappropriate judgments. So in conclusion, I have a challenge for you to just try and spend the rest of today not judging anybody for anything. Not yourself, not your friends and family, and certainly not the driver in traffic who cuts you off. How long do you think you can go? Can you go an hour? Can you go a day? Can you put this sermon topic into the back of your head the way that the Facebook post was in the back of my head, and just pull it out a couple of times over the week and just say, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? Do I need to work harder? So just see how you do and think about it. And remember that as Christians, we're supposed to build each other up and help each other and not tear each other down. Thanks.